Jim Bennett, United Utah Party candidate for the 3rd Congressional District seat. Thank you for being part of 3 Questions today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it very much.
Explain to us, what is the United Utah Party?
The United Utah Party is a new party that we're appealing to people who feel like they've been abandoned by the 2 major parties. I'd been a disaffected Republican for a very long time, and finally, right after Donald Trump secured the Republican nomination, I changed my voter registration from Republican to unaffiliated. And I got a call earlier in the year from Richard Davis, who is the former chair of the Utah County Democratic Party. And he's been frustrated by the fact that Democrats have been losing every statewide election for the past 20 years, and he's been trying to get them to reach out to the middle instead of reach out to the hard left, which is where they decided they want to go. So we decided that most of the people in the center, in the middle, in the mainstream, don't have a political home in the 2 major parties. So the United Utah Party is now a new home for people who are looking for moderate, common sense, practical, not partisan solutions.
You've been campaigning hard all over the district, and as you go around and introduce yourself in the United Utah Party, are people understanding what it is you're trying to do with this new movement?
They are. We're educating people. There are a lot of people who hadn't heard of us, but there are quite a lot of people who have, based on the amount of opposition we encountered when I tried to get on the ballot. The state refused to initially accept my application to file as a candidate, and we had to take it to federal court. And the federal judge determined that the state was spending tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars to deny me and deny the members of my party our constitutional rights. So people were following a lot of that, and so that, I think, in a way, the state did us a pretty big favor, because they introduced people through their opposition to what we were doing. They introduced people to the United Utah Party and its principles.
You've been a lifelong Republican up to the point of Donald Trump. Explain to us exactly what it is about the party itself, let alone Donald Trump, that you're displeased with.
Well, Ronald Reagan used to say he didn't leave the Democratic Party left him. And I feel very much the same way about the Republican Party. I didn't leave the Republican Party so much as the Republican Party left me. Principles that were very important to the Republican Party prior to Donald Trump are principles that the Republicans have abandoned in order to get a guy with an R next to his name in the White House. Case in point, immigration. You listen to Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush talk about immigration in a 1980 campaign debate, and they sound light years removed from this idea of we need to build a wall and we need to, we need to shut out refugees. That is a huge issue for me. Utah was a state founded by refugees who were driven from their homes because of what they believed, and it's the Republican Party that now thinks it's necessary to slam the door in the face of everybody that's going through that same sort of circumstance today. I think that's not only wrong on a partisan level, I think that's immoral. And so I look at the Republican Party today, and it's out of step with the principles of the Republican Party for most of my lifetime.
Does that include the Republican Party here in Utah, or is it the Republican Party nationwide?
Well, the Republican Party here in Utah has demonstrated consistently that they are much more interested in preserving their power than they are in honoring the will of the voters. And you look at that by the $500,000 pit they've dug for themselves in fighting SB 54, in fighting the reforms that make Utah elections more inclusive and not exclusive. And, as I look at that, the United Utah Party was actually formed largely in response to state issues. We weren't initially planning on bringing this to a federal level until the special election came into view.
You say that the 2-party system is broken in this country. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I remember seeing an ad, a campaign ad during the Republican primary, an attack ad against Tanner Ainge that showed Tanner Ainge's face in a graveyard. And somebody came along, the narrator says, if you want to hear something scary, Tanner Ainge says that when he gets back to Washington, he's actually going to work with the Democrats. Now that's scary. And then a bunch of bats flew out from behind the gravestones to make the point. And I thought, if we've gotten to the point where just talking to the other side, just working with the other side is somehow grounds for disqualification, then we're in serious trouble. The fact is the Republicans and the Democrats aren't willing to even talk to each other, and ideological and partisan purity is far more important than far more important than doing the people's business.
You know something about what you're talking about because it happened to your father, your late father, Senator
Right.
Bob Bennett. Tell us what that was like.
You know, it's really interesting because one of the things that I was really proudest of my father when he lost, because he refused to allow politics to define who he was as a person. He was very emotional when he lost, and it was, I think, emotionally devastating. How could it not be? It was devastating for the family. But within days, he had picked himself up and moved on, and he spent the last years of his life very happy, very productively out of the Senate, and demonstrating that being a senator was not just all that he was, that there was a whole lot more to who he was than just the office that he held. And that has been a real inspiration to me going through this, because this is not about winning an office or any of that kind of thing. It's about doing something that's significant and positive for the country and for the people of the 3rd District in Utah.
As I recall, when your father did not even make it out of convention,
Right.
it was because he was working across the aisle on legislation.
Right, right.
Does that not seem ironic to you?
Well, it demonstrates, I think, the need for the United Utah Party. My father had been ranked as one of the top 5 most conservative members of the Senate, yet he was willing to talk to Democrats, and he was willing to work with Democrats, and he'd forged some very significant alliances and real compromises. His Washington County land bill that he did with Democrat Jim Matheson was, I think, the gold standard for how we ought to be approaching public lands in this state. So a lot of you have to have coalitions and bipartisan agreements to be able to get anything done. The founders designed the Constitution to be such that everybody has to be able to talk to each other so that laws reflect a clear national consensus. That's the way the process is supposed to work, and someone who recognizes that now gets punished by the extremes in their own party.
The realities are that the Republicans and the Democrats are very separated. And now you have the White House that is attacking both.
Right.
And there's all kinds of political turmoil in Washington right now. If you are elected, you will essentially be an independent candidate. How much influence can you have in Washington not being connected to the Republicans, the Democrats, or the White House?
Right. I can have far more influence than any other freshman who would go back there as a Republican or a Democrat, because I can serve as an honest broker between both sides. There's no political cost to come and work with me the way there would be for a Democrat to come work with a Republican and vice versa. I will also, as the only non-Republican, non-Democrat in the House, be giving the 3rd District a national platform. All of a sudden, people are going to be paying attention to what Utah has to say, because we've broken through the two-party mess and actually done something productive. And the idea that sending another Republican back there is going to make any difference is belied by the fact that you have a Congress where both houses of Congress and the White House are all controlled by the same party, and yet this is on track to be the most unproductive Congress in 164 years. If that doesn't demonstrate that the two-party system just isn't working and isn't meeting the needs of our constituents, I don't know what would.
You mentioned that when Donald Trump won the nomination, the presidential nomination, you became an unaffiliated person to a political party. How badly do you dislike Donald Trump?
Oh, you know, I've been asked that. There was one piece that says he's not going to be able to work with the Republicans and Democrats he despises. I don't despise anybody, and I'm happy to work with Donald Trump when he's right. I think Donald Trump has done some things right. I think Neil Gorsuch was a great choice for the Supreme Court. I think Donald Trump was showing real signs of working with Democrats on DACA, and then undermined it with his Twitter war with Bob Corker and all the other kind of nonsense he's doing. I think he's demonstrating that he's much better at undermining his agenda than I would be. But no, when Donald Trump does something right, I am happy to work with him and happy to support him. I don't have any personal animus toward him necessarily. I think he's unqualified and unfit for the position he holds. But I don't wish him any ill personally. I just think the Trump agenda is wrong for the United States and wrong for the people of Utah.
There are reports out that in the midterm elections, there is a very real chance that the Democrats could take the House back. And if that happens, then the impeachment proceedings are more than likely to begin at the behest of the Democratic Party. Where would you fall if that happens? I know it's a theoretical, but where would you fall in that?
Well, people forget that impeachment is an entirely political process. There is no objective legal standard that you have to apply the way you would in a regular criminal court. So it depends on what the articles of impeachment are. If they just want to impeach him because they don't like him, that strikes me as, I think, an overreach of legislative power. But there are some things that Donald Trump has done that could very well represent grounds for impeachment, and I'd be willing to look at whatever those articles are and determine on a case-by-case basis whether that would be something I'd be willing to support. But I will say that I think one of the reasons Jason Chaffetz decided it wasn't much fun to be a congressman anymore is that it wasn't as much fun for a Republican congressman to hold a Republican president accountable. He was the rock star of the party when he was beating up on Hillary Clinton for Benghazi, but then all of a sudden he went to town hall meetings and he had constituents saying, well, are you going to hold this president accountable too? And his answer was, I'd rather not be in Congress. I'm going to hold this president and any president of any party accountable. And if Donald Trump has done something that merits removal from office, I'm not going to have any kind of partisan obstacle to considering that on its merits.
Who's funding the United Utah Party?
Who's funding the party or who's funding my campaign?
Well,
or is it both? Because I'm working fairly closely with the party in order to do some coordinated expenses to help. We've just filed our first FEC report, both for my campaign and for the party. And so if you want to know specifically where the money is coming from, there's not as much money, anywhere near as much money as what you're going to see in the Democrats and the Republican campaigns. But all of that is going to be publicly available as soon as the FEC publishes those reports.
Are they corporate donations or are they private donations?
They have to be private donations. Legally, you cannot have corporate donations in a federal race.
All right.
I looked at that, you know, my Democratic opponent in this last debate says, I'm not taking any corporate money, and I thought, well, neither is anybody else because that's against the law.
So who then is funding? Who do you know is funding the party and, by extension, your campaign?
Well, again, we also have strict campaign finance limits, so I've had dozens of donors that you'll be able to see online as you go to the FEC's website. You know, it's not a secret. It's all transparent. I mean, I could list all of them for you, but the campaign finance limits for a campaign are $2,700 is the max, and I think I've maybe had 2 or 3 people who have hit that max. So it's a group of people that are donating smaller amounts because they want to be able to see government reformed and think the United Utah Party and my candidacy are the best way to do that.
You are fighting an uphill battle, and you know that, against a very prominent Republican opponent and a very well-funded Democratic opponent. How do you feel your campaign is going? I mean, are you up off the ground? Do you feel like the momentum is starting in your direction, or where do you feel you are?
I do. I feel a tremendous amount of momentum, and people respond when they find out that this is an option and when they find out it's a credible option. You know, most people look at third parties as just some kind of fringe group. This is not a fringe movement. This is people who have been left behind as the 2 major parties have each gone off their own cliffs and toward their own fringes. We're the people in the center who are looking for a political home. And, you know, they told me I wasn't going to be able to get on the ballot, and I got on the ballot. And then they told me I wasn't going to be able to be in the official debate, and I got into the official debate. And I've been now in about 5 debates with the other candidates. And they did a KSL online poll that said I won the Doug Wright Show debate, and that people are saying that when they hear me in comparison to the other candidates, they recognize this guy knows what he's talking about, and this is an option that I didn't know was there that I'm now willing to consider.
You've spent many, many years in politics working alongside your father, who was Utah's senator for, I forget how many terms, 3 terms?
18
3
years.
terms, yeah. And so doubtless you have picked something up from him. If you could identify what it is you've picked up from your father and that you're employing in your own campaign and political career, what would you say it is?
What have I picked up from my father? Boy, you know, at the beginning of this campaign, somebody asked me at my first press conference, what are you going to do to distance yourself from your father in order to become your own man? And my response was, I'm not going to distance myself at all from my father. I'm going to wrap myself in my father's wisdom, because I think it's very difficult in terms of what I believe politically. So much of that I learned from watching my father, and I learned from conversations with my father. I think the one overriding issue is that my father had a wonderful sense of perspective, that he recognized that a political victory or a political defeat was not the most important thing in the world. We were always more important as his children and as his family than the office he held. He would always take our phone calls, even if he was on the floor of the Senate. If one of his kids was calling, he would come off and talk to us. And after, we talked about after his defeat, he recognized that politics didn't define who he was. He was able to go on with his life. And it's that sense of perspective that I try to wrap myself around and try to hold on to. And I really miss him, particularly during the Trump years. Because when things seemed to be going to pot back in the day, you could always call up Dad and he'd say, well, just take a step back and think about it for a minute. It's not as bad as you think. And I like to think that he would be saying that now, that he would recognize that there are reasons for optimism, even when there are real challenges that the country is facing.
If you are elected to Congress, what will be your priorities once you get there?
3 top priorities. The first is health care. It's remarkable to me that both sides have decided that they're going to sit and wait for the current system to collapse, and they're spending all their time trying to figure out how to blame the other guy for the collapse. My goal is to go back and actually try to fix the system. I think we do that through a mix of catastrophic insurance and medical savings accounts. One of my Republican opponent likes to talk about market forces driving health care, and I think that's I think any chance we have to introduce market forces into healthcare is good, but market forces only go so far. In our experience, in the Bennett family, we went skiing on Valentine's Day in 2011, and my then 14-year-old daughter took a wrong turn, and she tumbled down Solitude Mountain 300 yards, head over heels. Oh, dear. And she blacked out. She doesn't remember what she hit, but she hit something that caused a burst fracture in her spine, right there at the base of her spine, and it impinged on her spinal cord. And we rushed her to the emergency room, and in that kind of a circumstance, when you're in the emergency room, market forces don't do you any good. We weren't in a position to negotiate for the best price or compare resumes of surgeons. We just said, is there anybody here to make sure that my daughter can walk again? And so recognizing that, the need for catastrophic coverage to deal with those kind of circumstances, I think is essential. So I think Republicans want to lower costs, Democrats want to expand coverage. I want to do both of those things. And I think the approach that I've outlined there is the best way to do that. Healthcare, top priority. Public lands is a top priority. I mentioned my father's Washington County land bill. He anticipated that would be a template that every county in Utah would follow. And both the Republicans and Democrats have dropped that ball. I want to pick that ball up and run with it. I want to be able to settle the uncertainty about land issues in every county in the state, and particularly in the counties in the 3rd District. Third is the issue of immigration. I've taken issue with my opponent's call for a border wall, which I think represents the worst possible element of the Trump agenda, particularly since most of the people who come here illegally come here legally on a temporary visa and then stay when the visa expires. They're not scurrying across the border in the dead of night in large numbers, where that's a problem. There are already physical barriers in place. So I want to be able to have an immigration policy that reflects the best of who we are, and particularly a policy that's welcoming to refugees. The Republican Party, to his credit, Gary Herbert, is the only Republican governor in the country out of 32 Republican governors who has said refugees are welcome in his state. Every other Republican governor has said absolutely not. So those 3 issues, healthcare, immigration, and public lands, are going to be at the top of my agenda when I get back to Washington.
You say you feel like the momentum is turning in your direction, but you are trailing quite significantly in the polls. What do you see as the path to victory in this election?
Well, the path to victory is going to require an awful lot of shoe leather. Since we don't have the kind of money that my opponents have, I have to get out there and meet as many people as possible, and I've been in every county in the state, and I've been to every farmer's market and every possible public event I can possibly go to. But the thing is, the debate has given us an opportunity to introduce ourselves. We've made history by being the first non-Republican and non-Democratic party to be included in the official debate. And I think what you're seeing is that as people find out that this is a real alternative, that so many people have come to me and talked about, well, look how uphill the battle is. And I'm saying, you're all presuming that this is a typical political environment. And this is anything but a typical political environment. This is the first time in living memory where you have a Republican president who has an underwater approval rating in the state of Utah. This is the first time in living memory where you've had a Republican Congress that has failed so spectacularly that people, even lifelong Republicans like me and like members of my family, are now saying, there's got to be another way. This isn't working. So as I go out, I recognize it's an uphill battle, but somebody once asked me, well, what's your real goal here? And I said, my goal is to represent the 3rd District in the House of Representatives. That's still my goal, and I'm still confident I can get there.
Jim Bennett, United Utah Party candidate for the 3rd Congressional District seat of Utah. Thank you for being part of 3 Questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.